Welcome back to Incremental, the continuous improvement podcast. This is our Concepts Edition, episode 130. I'm Devin Bedoni of Like and Precision.
And I'm Uriel Eisen of Austere Manufacturing and Arda. And today's quote is, "Caution doesn't last," from Dave Gagney.
Sounds right.
From Ren Scott Manufacturing. Great quote.
You had to unpack it for me last time you told it to me.
Oh, yeah. So I think it's kind of...
Or put it in context, I guess, really.
Yeah, the context is kind of like when something goes wrong and then you come up with a fix, and often that fix just lives in someone's head and it's sort of like, oh, be careful. Mm-hmm. But there's no actual implementation of like poka-yoke or like, I don't know, some probing route. Like there's no action items take place to prevent it from happening again. Yeah. And so essentially you're just asking someone to be more cautious.
Right.
And that works and is effective
for a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you'll have the same issue.
The do better fix.
Exactly. Yeah. Do better. Be better. I don't know. I think that's really interesting. I've been thinking a lot about SOPs over the past little while. Uh-huh. Mostly, well, I mean, we're trying to build them into Arda, and we have them in there, but just trying to get the product to be better and like surfacing them in the right ways, etc. But it's just so interesting how many, like once you're aware of it, how many problems get solved in a like, okay, we're two smart people, let's put our heads together. Great, we solved it.
Yeah.
And that's it. Like there's no documentation, nothing gets updated, and that's great that you're able to solve the problem, but it's like, it doesn't really help the company in a long-term way. Yeah. And I think squarely falls under sort of, I don't know if it's firefighting exactly.
It's not firefighting. It's just like, I mean, I think it's just simply lack of documentation. It's just, it's tribal
there's no leverage.
It's tribal knowledge is what it is.
Yeah. And so there's no leverage. So you just spent 25 minutes solving a problem that then isn't documented. Yeah. So anyway,
I mean, there's a little leverage, right? In the sense that like you have embedded knowledge in your company. It's just not easily transferable or like transmutable, but it is there until someone else leaves. And that's why you see a lot of incumbents that do well and like are very successful, but they rely heavily on that tribal knowledge. And when there's a generational shift or some other like exterior force that causes a lot of people to leave or whatever the case may be, those companies tend to not weather the change as well.
Yeah, and I think like the short-term thinking versus long-term thinking, it's something that popped into my head this week, is this idea of like, imagine if you hired a scientist and you gave them an instruction set, which already we're like way beyond most companies, right? They don't get an instruction set because there's no documentation, including our shop across most operations.
Sure.
If the scientist then proceeded to like go like, oh, well, it actually like we weren't really getting the results we wanted. So I added more of this, and I don't remember exactly what I did, but like you can see the experiment turned out great.
Yeah, it worked. That's amazing.
Yeah, we got the results. You'd be like, okay, right. So now we have learned nothing. Yeah. Like that's, I guess, okay. I mean, it's not even good in a scientific sense. And I think that is the big divide between like thinking about things as like in the moment problem solving of like, oh shit, we need to ship parts or whatever we need to do. Yeah. Versus like, we need to understand this problem so that we can put in place a system that fixes this problem. Yeah. And I remember listening to an interview with one of the folks at Kern. I think it was on Within Tolerance. Mm-hmm. And he was talking about like he's a scientist and he approaches toolpaths as a scientist. So he's not trying to get a good surface finish.
Marv. Yeah.
He's just trying to play with variables to figure out what they do. Yeah. And then you can find a good combination of variables to get the surface finish you desire, not a quote unquote good surface finish. And every experiment that's ruined by variability is a lost opportunity to improve your SOPs or process, I think, which is almost every second of every day, I think, for me.
I just had this thought that like SOPs are fantastic, but also like huge failures in so many of the ways we have discussed in the last, 10 months, a year that we've been experimenting with attempting to implement them, which is why I think visual controls and visually arranged systems in physical space are so powerful, because they have sort of the same end effect of an SOP without requiring this abstraction of someone to stop, check, go read, review, and compare, and then continue on their way.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things that are very hard to create visual controls for processes or operations, but I think using that as like a guiding light is maybe pretty key in achieving success with these things.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So I'm reading Thinking Fast and Slow, as I think I mentioned, and the latest chapter I listened to very much speaks to this. System 1 is like very, very good at instantly calculating like relative values, but not absolute values. So like you can instantly know if one pile is bigger than the other.
Sure.
Right? Yeah. No problem. You can assess, relative distribution of like, is there more black or white marbles in this bag? And you can at a glance be very good about 5-1, you know?
So like comparative analysis.
Comparative, colors are super easy. Like there's a lot of things that our system 1 does ridiculously well.
Yeah.
And with no effort. And then the rest is system 2, and it's much slower and much more demanding. And I was thinking about it actually as it relates to, like things that you can see at a glance versus, hey, read this, figure, like if the second you're comparing actual quantitative number, real numbers and saying like, is this more or less than that? Like we were looking at your machine the other day of figuring out like, are the tools correct?
Yeah.
That's all like hard system 2 stuff. You're reading a number, you're holding the number in your memory, you're then reading another number, sort of doing like a compare.
Yeah.
If it was like, oh, well, that one's yellow, this one's blue, that would be instantaneous. Obviously, it can't be that way, but it was just interesting. And they start to quantify some of the differences in time and in the other impacts on you as a person, because like suddenly you're fully consumed with this task.
Yeah. And I think it not even like quantitative in terms of like numerical values, but even just like complex
like logic problems,
or even just like a series of steps, like a series of 10 steps that you're supposed to do the same way every time, but is not clearly delineated in space visually. Something like that, you probably watch one person do it 10 times in a row and it'll be different half the time for a lot of people. And especially and then if you're talking about across multiple people, the likelihood that those 2 people or 3 people are going to do those 10 steps in the exact same way is like probably nearly impossible. And I feel like that's where SOPs come into play, but simultaneously, like you're really swimming upstream against human nature a little bit.
Right, like the reliance on an SOP, it would be like making a door that's so complicated to use and needs an SOP, which is essentially when you walk up to a door and it says push on it, right? It's like maybe just change the door handle. I mean, there's a book about that, right? Yeah. That's an SOP in a sense.
Yeah.
And you could just make it a well-designed door.
It's true. Yeah, we're going, so we, had a lot of upheaval midsummer. And it's been kind of a hard climb out of that hole. Not like it's been really good and business is great and everyone is fantastic that we're working with, but it's just been like heavy
growing pains.
Yeah, it's been a heavy lift for everyone involved. And I feel like we're just now maybe achieving a little bit of a plateau where we can catch our breath a little bit and kind of look around and take stock. And there's some of these things that's like, okay, how are you doing this? Oh, this is how I do it. Like we need to, and there was this one development thing that did anybody finish that? You know, and like,
Yeah.
there's a lot of that happening right now where we do have to decide on a standard way of doing it, but we still don't have, like, we theoretically have the foundations in place to document, make visible, and like populate to the floor SOPs, but getting them across the line and then getting them like actually referred to is remarkably challenging.
Yeah.
It almost makes me want to say, like, don't even bother. Just break these down into smaller and smaller tasks and make them visually controlled or visually
I think that's
simple.
the ideal. I think there's a few pieces that I'm kind of seeing. Like, there's now aspects of the business that I frankly don't know how to do.
Yeah, same.
Because Sam does them.
Yeah.
And that's a success on the other hand, on one hand.
Sure.
And on the other hand, it's like, if he's out sick or whatever, something happens.
Yeah.
And similarly about me, right? Like, if I'm out, there's many things, and many of them are really basic. Like, he just had to call me yesterday about recovering from like a low air error mid tool change.
Oh yeah.
And he's like, how do I do this again?
Yeah.
And so now we're on a phone call together. It feels productive, but like, that's an SOP, right? Like,
yeah.
And even if they're not perfect, I mean, I totally hear what you're saying. And like, I think that's exactly why this is going to be a slow process with Arda, is because like, just writing a bunch of stuff isn't that helpful.
I mean, that is the place where we do find it actually to be extremely helpful.
Yeah.
The oddball scenarios that happen once a while and you need a reminder, because that's where it's intuitive as an individual to go look.
Right, because you don't remember.
Yeah, because you have zero clue.
Yeah.
And you there's no way out of it. But when it's like, do I put the tool holder in the thing to heat it first, or do I grab the tool first? And, you know, whatever the case may be.
Right.
That's not a
do whatever feels right.
Yeah.
Is tempting.
Yeah.
But here's my thought, is that there is a mode of operating where the focus is kind of executing the task. And then there's another mode that would be sort of like, is our SOP good? Let's find out.
Uh-huh.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like, the second you shift into the second, a lot of things change, because inherent in that is referring to the SOP.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's like hugely idealistic, but I think also would be more, I bet a company that did that over like a 10-year span would.
I agree.
Do well. And so it's just putting yourself in a position to have that long time horizon.
Yeah. And it might be as simple as like parsing these things out to be, I think there's, what am I trying to say here? I think there's a little bit of folly in expecting like constant conformance, and that people's first intuition or first thought will be to go to the SOP. And I think there may be organizations where that really works, and
Toyota.
And kudos to them. I think what I'm seeing, at least in our organization, that there's definitely going to have to be people who go through, do these things purposefully, like you're talking about. Like, let's do this to the SOP, see what happens. Then we all have a discussion about it, and we talk about what needs to be changed. And it's probably not going to be like a perfect conformance to whatever the new SOP is, but we've moved things forward a little bit. Yeah. And at least there's attention being paid to it.
I mean, I think you're 100% right. Needing an SOP is a failure already.
Sure.
Right? Like, that's already, it's just like, you shouldn't need an SOP.
Right.
On the flip side,
in a perfect world,
on the flip side, the second you do need one, it would be really helpful if people referenced it and updated it.
Yeah.
I was curious on that topic. You have a note here about like visibility, sort of maybe solving some problems.
Yeah. Couple episodes, I think, ago, I was talking about needing or trying to move back towards pull.
Yeah.
Had a good conversation with Alec at White Industries. And he was kind of like, do you need pull or do you need people? Like, what do you actually need? And
Right.
it's kind of like, well, here we need
All of
pull
them.
and here we're doing push and blah, blah, blah. And I was kind of like, okay, I guess I need to think about this a little bit more. And what I've kind of come around to is that we don't, like you had said, fundamentally, we work to order. So we are doing pull, more or less.
Yeah.
In terms of like, we're not producing things that people haven't ordered. On the flip side, figuring out where people should be working when in between an order being placed and an order being shipped is a big puzzle to pull apart. And striving for pull between each of the different processes or operations in the shop is a good way to create visibility, I believe, into where things need to be done. So we had actually, which one did you highlight here? Which one were you referring to?
Oh, yeah, that second one.
So we did a simple thing. You came by the shop and we had some conversation, and we'd talking of things that get started and not taken across the line.
Yeah.
So we'd built those setup carts in the spring, I think, or maybe winter, a while ago now.
Yeah.
They've been great. They were very impactful. They kind of solved one aspect of our changeover process. And we'd had some discussions about how that could work as for triggering work to be done and whatnot. But it wasn't really working.
Okay.
And so we just made a simple like tape section on the floor that was where queued jobs, like with cut stock and tooling, potentially work holding, would be queued on a cart for a machine.
Okay.
And basically it was like, this needs to be kept full. So every machine has a queued job ready for it.
Yep.
And all of a sudden things are going smoother.
Interesting. That's very cool.
Like theoretically we had,
Right.
keep coming back to like the devil is in like such minute details in these systems. And the part that keeps coming across my kind of desk as like, these are not like replicable things that you can like just copy and paste from business to business. I think there's foundational lessons that you can pass along, but when it comes to implementation, there's so many minute details that really, really affect how these things function. And like this was one of them where we had all the pieces in play.
And you knew all the information.
We knew what we needed to do. And it was this it literally took 2 minutes.
Yeah. That's awesome.
And a discussion. And now there's a lot more clarity to the shop floor. And there's also, and the kind of the cool thing was,
that's so funny. I have a one-to-one analogy in my shop, I'm realizing.
Yeah.
I haven't done it though.
So the cool thing was, now there's more flexibility in when a setup can be done or prepped because there's better visibility into it needing to be done. And I think the from a pull standpoint, people are not like the shop floor personnel are not necessarily worried about trying to get ahead of that buffer because it's just like, this is your buffer, maintain it, don't think beyond that. Beyond that doesn't exist yet. Like the upcoming jobs don't exist yet, don't work on those. So now there's availability potentially when things slow down to do whatever, to clean, to do downstream stuff instead of trying to focus on upstream stuff.
That's interesting.
And then simultaneously, as a programmer, I'm scrambling less because just this simple act of creating sort of two buffers, one of like programmed parts and one of setup parts, effectively doubled our buffer.
Okay.
And so I'm less under the gun and I have more flexibility about when I do my programming. Anyway, it's just hilarious.
That's so funny. Okay, so here's mine.
Yeah, let's hear it.
Is we have, right now we have kind of an outrageous amount of stuff to machine, leading into the holidays, some releases we're doing, etc. Outrageous, like, I don't know, it's probably 2 weeks of machining, right? And
like just straight running, you mean?
Well, that's the part. So we're kind of like, okay, how can we get through this faster? And for a long time, you're like us keeping the machine running, quote unquote, all day.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, okay, you start it with no, we don't like set a timer or anything for when it's going to be done, even though we're running the same programs over and over. So like you could just set a timer. And so sometimes if it falls during lunch, it's like, okay, then it's down for 15, 20 minutes, right?
Yeah. And
I suspect there's a ton of slack in there. And so something we've discussed before and have not just done the simple thing.
Yeah.
Is laying out a buffer for like, okay, this is the machine. The machine is running. Before walking away from the machine, let's get everything in place to run it again. And we keep doing it. And I had an interesting conversation with Sam. He was like, yeah, I started doing that all the time. But then what would happen is I would change, something would change. And so we'd want to run something else. And so then I sort of gave up on it.
Oh, interesting.
Which I think is more of a buffer problem. Right. Like
it's an information problem.
It's like not isolated enough from the rest of the operation. What I was talking about with like, not enough buffers across the board, and so we're constantly just bumping into rocks.
Yeah.
So now that we've increased our supply of pins on the assembly station, we have way fewer like, oh, we need pins like right now, and we're gonna run like 10 and take them out of the machine and deliver, right? Like we need them this second. So
yeah.
It did make me wonder in your scenario, just to play something out, if a bunch of, let's say 3 of those carts get taken away in one day.
Yeah.
Or I don't know, super quickly.
Yeah.
Suddenly it's activating 3 things with theoretically sort of the same priority. And I know this is, I think someone emailed us about sort of the concept of like lash. Is that it?
Yeah.
Was that Brian?
Yeah.
And I thought that was very interesting. And something I feel a lot, I'm guessing that I'm not alone as a small business owner, where you're kind of like, oh, I need to reply to this email. And then you sit down and you're like, oh, I needed to first empty the 3D printer and get that 3D print running because I want to see those parts today. Oh, and also the CNC has stopped, and also. And so you're just kind of trying to do like 7 things. Do you think in that case, it means that your buffers are too low such that everything is activated and urgent? Like multiple things are suddenly critical path. And I wonder if that's a signal that you need to raise the water level, not lower it.
Which things are critical path are you talking about?
I'm just thinking like if a bunch of your carts are gone,
as in
suddenly
they're being set up?
Yeah, they're on the machine.
Yeah.
Suddenly your buffer is telling you need a bunch more, you need 3 more, 4 more carts.
Yeah.
Right now.
Well, no. You need 3 or 4 more cart. You need that number of carts set up before
the thing stops running.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so
which is a fair amount of slack.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So for a second, if you imagine removing the upstream buffer of your programmed parts,
yeah,
suddenly you'd be like, oh no, I need to program 3 distinct jobs in the next couple days, and each one might take me a day. And so if I get the order wrong of which one I tackle first, there's a very good chance that I'll idle a machine.
Yeah.
And I think that's mode a lot of my business is operating in.
Yeah.
And so I suspect by increasing your buffers, you're sort of eliminating that urgency. And so you can end up with way lower lash and way higher single piece flow from when I start, when you start 3 or 5 different projects all sort of at one time and you're like hopping between things, it's just a very inefficient mode.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think we will end up with much more consistent flow this way. One thing it made me realize too, because I'm still someone who can do most of the things in the business and especially some of the higher value things, is that if there's more of a buffer between programming and the shop floor, that gives me personally more flexibility in my time, so I can effectively be a fill-in on the shop floor in a way that I was not capable of before, because I was always under the gun because of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So we experienced that a little bit this last week, where I was able to kind of like jump off of programming and admin work because I was like, well, that buffer's full, or that buffer's mostly full, this buffer's full, I've got at least half a day before I have to really like fully be engaged. And then it's not even fully engaged like emergency, right? It's fully engaged to refill your buffer, not to
That's really cool.
idle a machine.
That's very I don't know, inspiring to hear, because something we've been talking about is exactly that across the whole business, with customer acquisition, with converting, sort of like a conversation of like, yeah, we'd love to do some work with you guys, to like, okay, is this happening? And I think buffers would be really helpful, right? Like I'm just making this up, but I like to keep 8 potential wholesale customers kind of in the hopper. And then downstream from that, we like to have, let's say, 3 big orders active in the shop at any given time on top of our retail. So I could just at a glance see like, oh yeah, we have 3. And then we're down to 2. It's like, oh, let me go talk to all the people, these 8 of like prime. I don't know, right? Like you could kind of.
There's a lot of variables there that I think make that particular instance challenging, but yes.
But I think you're right, but we exchange sort of a crappy system for no system at all.
No, absolutely.
And so I think that's where I'm there now. I'm just like,
as I said that, I was like, well, actually, if you had like, immediately my brain went to the failure modes, of course, right? Like everybody. So I was like, well, if you email all 8 of them, then you might end up with more than you want. And then I was like, well, actually, if you have a buffer, you don't need to them to respond quickly. So you can email 1. Wait. And if they say yes or no,
that's a good point.
That triggers whether you email the next one, or, if they ignore you, probably not a good customer that you want. And then it's your choice to say no. Right. And then you can go on to the next, and the urgency is kind of removed from the.
That's interesting. I think
the system.
The last piece I'll mention here is the idea of like flow where you can, pull where you must.
Yeah.
I think is misleading, has misled me, because that is the goal, but it is not like there's all those, anathema stories of Toyota executives walking around a shop floor and being like, more inventory, right? And it's like, what?
Yeah.
But I think that's it, is that you were doing one better than pull, which is flow, except you hadn't earned it.
Right.
Right. And so like theoretically flow means that when something is done, it gets passed to the next.
And then is done.
But that should be available and reliable. And if it's neither of those things, but you're pretending it hopefully is, it's like a fail.
Yeah.
And then pull is a more, it's a better tool for driving improvement, maybe.
Pull?
What is it? I think it's that you need stability to do anything.
Pull is kind of how would we say this? I mean, I think pull allows you to level in a way that flow does not.
Yeah.
And specifically across.
Okay, actually, that is the difference between potentially, so pull versus push. I don't know if it's versus push, but like what you were doing previously was, I'm not sure it was pull, because you are producing to demand, but you don't have that pacemaker process that separates your production from the market, and you need that. And actually creating those buffers essentially lets you do that. I think, right? So that would be the distinguishing feature. It's like if you're taking orders and dumping them onto your shop floor and saying like, flow, baby, like we're only producing to demand, crack the whip, then you're missing all of the benefits. And then if you can insulate it but flow, then that's sort of the optimal, because you have reduced whip.
Yeah.
Anyway, all right.
Yeah, I think not necessarily on that topic, but I think the other place it comes into play is if you remove urgency from some aspects of the process, that allows you to have more flexibility in where labor is allocated. And in a variable market or a variable process like ours, I think that has massive benefits that will be much higher than a theoretical flow, through all of the lines, where Right, because there are going to be these waves of work that come through the shop. And one operation is going to be really heavily loaded. And then that wave is going to move through to the next. And these buffers slow down that wave a bit. And then they also allow people to jump off of the unloaded area to the loaded area. If that makes sense.
Right, yeah. Yeah, and if you take it out of being an emergency, that can happen with some intention.
Yeah.
Without stalling out the other aspects of the business.
Yeah. And it's like that wave is gonna crash somewhere in the business, right? Like if you get 20 orders and you only have the capacity to run 5 per week, whatever, just random numbers, right? Like if those 20 orders land all at the same time, they're gonna crash somewhere. That wave of orders is going to crash somewhere in the business. But the more you can create these buffers, the way I sort of am visualizing it, is it makes that crash like very gradual instead of like a big boom that happens somewhere where to continue with this metaphor, where the seafloor like gets really shallow all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Right? Like the more long and gradual you can make that, the more it's going to kind of like even out as it moves through.
Yeah.
I think that is helpful. For everyone's sanity.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so I have 2 things. Well, I have a few things here. So we've been doing. Kyle did another implementation of Arda in a shop in Denver, and it's really cool to see how people approach their inventory.
Yeah, and
just like learning more. I don't know. It's like. We're deep in the weeds, but some interesting insights. So one is a lot of, we see a lot of like minimum 2 order 10 as a thing that customers are kind of like, hey, can we do this?
Uh-huh.
And we're thinking about it. That's a really good example of batching being driven by setup time and other fixed costs. Because typically when we dig into it, there are scenarios where there's a big like bulk discount at 10 pieces, right? In which case, we don't consume very much, but we don't want to pay that higher price. Dubious of whether that price break is as awesome as we kind of imagine, but let's just pretend it is fully awesome. That's a good case for maybe minimum 2 order 10. But in most cases, it's actually the fixed costs of preparing an order, like deciding like, I'm going to get an order in to McMaster today. So let me just order a bunch of this because I know it's going to be a while. The second it's a click of a button, all your links are open, you check out, you're done. There's really no reason to do it. Or like, let's say it's Amazon Prime, right? There's no shipping costs.
Yeah.
And so you're just taking up more shelf space and, I don't know. So in most of those cases, after discussing it, it's much better to do like minimum 2 order 2.
Yeah.
And just call it a day. You can do a nice 2-bin system. It's super easy. But I just thought that was a really nice example of fixed costs driving batching. Like that's the big temptation to batch is just your fixed costs.
Yeah. I mean, fundamentally, right?
Yeah.
Amortization of waste.
Right. Yeah. And the second you get rid of it, and that's the whole point of, not the whole point, but one of the big aspects of lean and driving to smaller batch sizes is removing that ability to amortize makes you see the waste and then you can fix it.
So here's a funny one.
Yeah.
And I still don't know what the answer is, right? Mm-hmm. So like probably a year and a half ago, we ordered like a giant thing of toilet paper for the shop.
Okay.
A huge box.
Yeah.
We will run out this week.
Oh, exciting.
And so
you're thinking 2-ply or 3-ply?
Well, the question was like, do we just order that same box and get another year and a half out of this?
Right.
Or whatever. Probably a year and a half.
Yeah.
Or not. I like just trying to figure out like, I want to say no, let's order less more often. But at the same time, I'm not sure there's a real benefit there.
So what is the savings?
Of which?
Of buying in bulk.
Oh, I have no idea. I haven't even looked.
Okay. So like if there's no savings, then there's no reason to do it because you're just sitting on more money. let's say your roof springs a leak, or someone tips the box over and they all spill on the ground, or and then there's like, you're not constrained by space.
Not really. Yeah. I mean, it would be like probably simpler to not have this giant box that then is becoming steadily more empty.
Oh, is that the one
space.
under the sink?
Yeah.
So that, like, if your toilet overflowed, would that damage your toilet paper?
Probably.
So that would be a reason, because then you're going to damage a year and a half of toilet paper.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't know. So on that topic, though, I put it in next week's episode, but I'll pull it to this week's. So this is a funny one. Rationalize your production. And without standards, there is no improvement. Both in one. So we were running out of olive oil.
At home?
Yes. Okay. Where we also have our...
Yes.
But running out of olive oil, and so I just went to this grocery store, and then as I was there, I was like, that looks expensive. So I checked Costco. It was just over half the price at Costco, and we go through quite a bit of olive oil. So then I was like, all right, I'll add it to the list. And then I checked what it would cost for them to deliver. They charge $3 per item unless you hit some threshold, and I forget what it is. And I was like, $3 per item. And I've looked at this before, and I just didn't want to pay for it because every now and then we do go to Costco. Then it occurred to me, rationalize your production. What is your time worth? There is no way I'm retrieving an item every 3 minutes when I go to Costco. It just doesn't happen, right? So we're now moving a lot of as much as we can, all the Costco stuff to just online order. Yeah. Because it turns out, in a strange twist, Costco is more efficient at doing their fulfillment than I am at shopping.
Who would have thought that?
Yeah. And like, I do know that they try to move stuff around, so you are kind of doing this long wandering, treasure hunt.
Oh, do they?
Yeah. I talked to one of their employees for a while. They have some crazy stuff going on. Such as they don't know where their pallets are in the store.
Interesting.
They just leave it to the people, and then they have I think they call it the drive side and non-drive side.
Doesn't really matter, right? It's just like labeled on the pallet, and when it's gone, it's gone.
I think kind of that, but also kind of, I'm not sure that it's actually the best answer, which I hesitate to say because I'm a huge fan of Costco. I mean, they're famously efficient.
Famously efficient and famously unique in their thinking about things.
So like, it's probably very rational. I think part of it is that WMS system, warehouse management systems, tend to be quite expensive, and so they have capped their margins to the customer, and so like they keep things very cheap. Yeah. I'm not sure that then means don't use it, and because she was like, yeah, we do lose things sometimes because we have whatever it is, I forget how many millions of dollars flowing through there per.
Sure.
Anyway, without getting into it, yeah, so rationalize your production. It's way cheaper for them to do the shopping for me at Costco than for me to do it.
Yeah. And
because we have a standard purchasing, like good documentation and everything, I went through and updated our Costco items. So now they just order online. Fewer trips to the store, save time.
It's this modern world.
More availability. I'm very curious about the relative efficiency of online orders because I feel like everyone kind of looks at you weird if you just have a bazillion like Amazon packages showing up. But a truck also delivered the items to the grocery store. And I know that there's some balance, and I'm very curious about what it actually is and not just what the perception is.
You mean like, obviously there's economic realities. You're talking about like actual like carbon footprint.
Let's say carbon footprint.
Driving and like.
Yeah, like I drive to the store, let's say.
Total utilization of human time to get things from point A to point B.
All that.
Yeah, I don't know.
Like I bet it's not sort of what's in the zeitgeist, I guess. But maybe it is. It also depends who you ask, probably.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I wonder. Yeah, I mean, it's like, is all of Amazon's delivery just a loss leader?
I don't know.
Because I could very well see that being highly effective for them for market share.
Right. Great question.
So So like it might not have an
if anyone's listening from the Acquired podcast, you know,
it might not have an economic imperative the way we imagine it to.
What do you mean an economic imperative?
Like the cost of delivery may be greatly depressed in the sense that it doesn't reflect its actual cost.
I think, okay, so in the case of Amazon, I know that their Prime membership is referred to as like the best loyalty program ever created.
Yeah.
So the free shipping is definitely a loyalty thing.
Yeah.
In the case of Costco, I'm not sure that that's also true. So I would guess that $3 is maybe what it costs them sort of to deliver.
Could be.
I am also curious if that'll shift over time because I would guess that they sell a lot more with people shopping in the aisles.
Yeah.
So I'm sure you can't order their rotisserie chicken online because that's their loss leader.
We just got our Costco card for the first time ever.
Oh, no big deal.
Welcome
to the club.
I'm just so amazed that it's like literally $1.50 for a hot dog and a soda.
The whole place is pretty mind-blowing. That said, I did just see a post, someone asking like, hey, we just got our Costco membership. Does anyone actually save money being a member? Because every time we've gone, we've spent like $500. They were like, yes, you need to go in with a list. And anyway.
Yeah, I mean, they do make a lot of money, so they're doing something right.
Yeah,
but
they're doing a lot of things.
I mean,
right.
that is the hot dog's definitely is a notorious loss leader, right?
Yes.
But still, the fact that it exists blows my mind. You can't even buy a Snickers bar for $1.50.
So when you put it that way. Okay, a few other high level things. So yeah, back to the thinking fast and slow thing.
Yeah.
So they divided it into system 1 and system 2. System 1 being like very intuitive, gross calculations that are very efficient in time and energy, but often pretty off the mark in certain scenarios.
Yeah.
And then system 2 being much more accurate, much less pleasant to engage in, et cetera, et cetera. And listening to it, I'm just like, man, I think Toyota came to the same conclusions without proving anything, because like their A3 process is basically saying, okay, so you have a system 1 idea, now quantify every part of it.
Yeah.
Right? And now make a decision.
Yeah.
And it turns out, I think we're just not very practiced at that. And it's very hard. And most of the time you're like, I don't know.
Yeah, you get halfway through and then you're like, how about system 1?
Yeah, exactly. And so it's kind of fascinating. I just feel like, yeah, they arrived at like all the things people do poorly and then kind of corrected for it. And then,
yeah,
you know, whatever it was, 35 years later, Kahneman and Tversky kind of came about and like named a lot of the things that I think they were pretty, I don't know if they were aware of them or if they just fixed them, because those are not the same thing, right? It's like, if we see this error, how can we count for this error? Add this step. That does not mean you have a deep understanding of why that error exists.
Sure.
So anyway, but I just thought that was really interesting. It's like a lot of these biases go away. Like the recommendations for how to avoid system 1 biases is like straight out of
the lean handbook.
Yeah. It's pretty wild. It's very cool.
Huh.
So like one example is the availability bias. So like one way to assess, let's say I said like, this is out of the book, you know, how assertive are you? And basically what your brain does to get a quick idea is you search for instances of you being assertive.
Yeah.
And then if they come to mind readily, you think you're more assertive. And if they don't come to mind readily, you think you're not assertive.
Yeah.
Which is, I don't know, it's a way to do it. But then if I started asking more questions about like quantify the number of interactions you can remember.
Yeah.
It, you know, maybe list out each one on a scale of assertiveness or something. Suddenly you start to really degrade that bias, because you might just find you're only thinking of 2, and in both the examples, and so then you might say like, well, how confident are you that that's a good sample?
Yeah.
And you probably go like, well, I mean, it's not great. You're right. Like suddenly you're like actually problem solving explicitly instead of just finger in the air. Yeah. Which way is the wind blowing? I thought that was interesting.
I like
it. We did a site visit for another customer that's been running with Arda for a while, and they said that it, quote, changed the way they run their business, and they're now up 150% production and headed to 200% production, which was, I don't know, just very gratifying.
That's awesome.
Very awesome. They straight up are now searching for bottlenecks, though they don't know they're called bottlenecks, instead of just scrambling for parts, basically. So like we just freed up. It's just not, not to say they don't run into problems of like,
sure,
oh shit, this Kanban fell off the shelf and so it didn't get triggered.
Yeah.
But that was very cool. So here's a thought on sort of a cadence question. It seems to me that there should be a cadence for triggering work that allows for the sequence in which it was triggered to be the same as the order the order in which it was triggered is also the order in which the work should be executed. Theoretically. And I'm trying to figure out what makes that work. And I think, and I could be wrong, but I think it has something to do with the amount of time it takes to replenish, like to do the work on a Kanban. That amount of time is sort of consistent across the business, right? So like me taking 5 minutes or whatever, half an hour to do task A, it's not going to be like 6 hours to do this Kanban. And meanwhile, this other Kanban is like 3 minutes. That's part of it, but also relating to the buffer that you're working for. Mm-hmm. And if those are matched across, and it doesn't have to be across the whole business. I think it's like across things where you have, I think where it's useful is things where you have the same person doing work across multiple stations that you don't want to like, I'm guessing, I don't know. It's really
You're talking about trying to match cadence of different tasks?
So like if in your business you need to program another program and you need to like send an invoice, the order in which you do those does kind of matter. And it's not just like, well, which one is in the bin first?
Well, it doesn't always matter.
No, but the question would be, what are the variables that make it matter more or less? And is there a way to design systems that don't require... Now, granted...
I think looping back to the buffer discussion...
Yeah.
The buffers make it matter less, right?
Yes. So if your buffer period is greater, like depleting the buffer will take longer than executing any one Kanban in your to-do bin.
Sure.
Would sort of be a prerequisite for not having to like look around and check on things, right?
Yeah, I think so.
And then as that ratio changes, like I don't know. It's
complicated. I think this would be a whole other podcast episode, probably.
Good chance.
Just discussing.
And we're meant to wrap it up.
Yeah. I do think like coming back to, I forget what they were called, but like the standard sequence.
Yeah.
What were those things called?
You're talking about like A, B, B, C, D.
Where you put your Kanbans in a standard sequence out of order of how they were triggered, and produce them in a standard sequence. That I think is probably the simplest way to approach this, where it's like,
right,
whatever, you always work as an individual, say like you have a buffer of tasks that you have to do. Some of them are administrative, some of them are assembly or whatever,
right?
And how this would work in real life, I don't know, but like let's say there's one spot where all of your personal Kanbans land, and they go in a standard sequence and you work from right to left, and that's your priority list, right?
Right.
I think assuming you do have a big enough buffer to the next downstream processes, that takes away most of that seeking for urgency.
Yeah, but you can also then change the downstream process buffers to make sure that can be true.
Right. No, I mean you find out like, very quickly if it's not true.
Yeah. And like we definitely had that with our pins, as I mentioned, where they were just the amount of buffer relative to the other items we produced on the CNC.
Yeah.
Was like, I don't know, 1/10 or less. And so that mismatch made it mean that if they got lost in the queue, you're definitely going to run out.
Yeah.
Anyway, and more to learn there, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah. On that note, I just had this thought the other day that pulse systems require a lot of thought and planning up front, but less ongoing work except to improve the process.
Yeah.
And push requires less upfront work, but always is a consistent amount of work to keep things moving through.
Interesting. Whoa. Huh. I have sort of a counterexample, which is like ERPs take a lot more time to implement than a Kanban system. Like it's a really big lift. So what would you... I think you're right, though, because I think that's why everyone ends up in push is because the next thing to do, the next easiest option, when you get more demand, like let's say you're a hobbyist in your garage and suddenly like someone's like, hey, can I have 100 of those?
Yeah.
The easiest, most intuitive option is to then go plan out how you're going to make 100.
Yeah.
I think you're well on your way.
I think Kanban to ERP is not quite...
Okay.
The correlation or like the comparator.
Yeah.
I think it's more like right, because like there's actually another note I have here, but ERP wraps in a lot of different aspects of the business that are not covered by Kanban.
Yeah. That's a good point.
So, and you don't need an ERP to effectively do push, right?
No. You need an MRP, even if that's a pad of paper.
Yeah, you need something.
Yeah.
But like I think you just keep having to do the work over and over again.
Right.
Whereas if you design a pull system, you're sort of designing the track and then you just kind of like let the trains, well, theoretically, let the trains loose on the track.
It's not only theoretical. I just did a demo today for a potential customer who's growing a lot, looking at different systems, found Arda, and I mean, it's tough in like 45 minutes to explain push versus pull, etc. But that was the big thing. I sort of was like, look, like command and control style production is great theoretically, except it takes a ton of work to make the plan, and then also the plan doesn't work.
Right.
And I think it maybe takes more. Maybe that's right. Anyway. It's definitely more work. It's more work to say, okay, how should we size all of our Kanban loops and where should they all be versus like, oh, hey, you're running the table saw. Here's your cut list.
Yeah. And it's also more work to do everything we've been talking about of like, okay, so we keep running out of stuff. Why is that happening? Not just because Joey didn't do it fast enough. Like what's the fundamental aspect of this system? Yeah. Like what's this kink in the train track? Right. And how do we fix this kink in the train track? Whereas I feel like push, you'd just be like, well, push more through that kink. Like, you know, it's, I do think it is more upfront work, less down the line.
Yeah.
Another quick thing, I was having a discussion with your brother about ERP, and it made me realize that, it's funny how many things in this whole process have been about just like sort of like looking at something from the other side a little bit. And I think a lot of people approach ERP, enterprise resource planning, when what they really want is just tracking, enterprise resource tracking. And they want to be able to look at something and know what its status is, not necessarily forecast and plan to that degree. And I shudder to say this, but I almost feel like there should be a different sort of like market segment of software that leaves out all of the accounting side, leaves out any aspect of planning. It's just like, this is how you track everything in your shop. So you know where it is, you know what's happened to it. Adding all of your whatever documentation, historical information and stuff, but like totally not trying to do any of the planning or accounting, because that's where they always seem to fall on their face.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, that's a can of worms.
It is. That's a whole other podcast episode.
That's very interesting, though. Awesome. Well, I think that's a good place to leave it.
Sure.
On that bombshell.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone, for coming along yet again. Episode 130.
Crazy.
Been doing it for a minute here.
Yeah.
You can find me on Instagram at lichen_MFG, on the web, lichenprecision.com. We have a Patreon. Go have a look.
And you can find me at austere_manufacturing on Instagram and austeremfg.com. Also, arda.cards on Instagram and on the internet. And we have one for the podcast, which is Incremental CI. And we'll talk to you next week.
Adios.